devices and sensors, millions and millions of them being connected to the network and to the cloud, and combined with AI, it's going to transform every aspect of our lives. I mean, in the automotive sector, you're going to see autonomous vehicles. You're going to see all sorts of entertainment services become available in the car. The car is going to look more like a computer than it does a car.
Hi, Rashesh. Thank you so much for coming onto the show today.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be here, Grace. Thank you for having me.
So when you started your career, you were a consultant at Accenture and you worked at Deloitte as a program manager, and you did your MBA and you joined Tata Sky, which is India's second largest paid TV business, as their interim chief information officer. And then you joined DIRECTV. Then DIRECTV was acquired by AT&T. Now you're running the product and platform at AT&T, right? That's a really successful career. So before we start the show, I would love to learn more about how you started and how you get to where you are today.
It's been a fun ride, Grace, and it's great to kind of think back, but yeah, how I got to where I am, really was a function of a couple of things. One, I got my degree in engineering when I was young, and I did several internships and I worked a lot of jobs. And through that process, I realized what I do is I love problem solving and I love to work with people. But I didn't want to sort of sit in a cube and just work, on my own. And so I really chose to start my career off in consulting. For the first 7 years of my career, I had a chance to work in several different industries, and work on several different types of problems, work with different teams and expand my network. And that was a really formative way to get started, because, when you're graduating from college, you don't have a pinpoint understanding of what you love doing. And so this gives you a chance to grow your network, to work in a lot of different organizations. But after 7 years of consulting, I felt like, you work on something and then you move on and you work with a different company. I wanted to leave my fingerprints on an organization, on a culture. And I looked for companies that were entrepreneurial, that had, leading edge products. And at the time, DIRECTV had just recently launched service. And so I joined DIRECTV. And as you said, I had a really fun ride watching that business go from startup to becoming a Fortune 100 business with revenues greater than McDonald's, right? And we did that over a 15-year period. And it was a lot of fun. And now joining AT&T is amazing, because this is an institution that, has been providing this country critical services since the 1800s. And it's an organization that has a long legacy. And so learning the culture and the business has been a true joy.
Yeah, for sure. You mentioned something really interesting. You mentioned DIRECTV. You were at DIRECTV for 14 years, and DIRECTV since started then to sold it to AT&T was only 15 years, right? So what was that process like, and what was your learning there?
I love watching businesses grow, right? Because you go through various stages of maturity. It's just like watching your kids grow. And when I first joined DIRECTV, the product was tremendously successful, but we didn't have the infrastructure to be able to scale the business and serve millions and millions of customers. And so my initial time at DIRECTV was helping the company, and I was able to bring a lot of my consulting experience, build that platform for infrastructure, whether that's the underlying technology platform, the CRM platform in terms of how do you manage and support customers. We built all those capabilities so that the business and the service could scale. And that was fun. And then my later stages, at DIRECTV, I led customer experience. And that was really about how do you, now that you have a lot of customer relationships, how do you really provide them, the right level of experience, and what are things you can do to bring, surprise and delight to those customers. And so it's just a fun process watching an organization grow. And I feel like I was there virtually from, a few years after the start of the company, as you said, all the way until the company was acquired by AT&T. And so it was a very fun ride.
Yeah, I'm sure. Like we'll dive deep into that like a little bit later. So, I want to go back to your career development. You are extremely successful. Now you're in charge of AT&T Business portfolio wide P&L with 36 billion of annual revenue. That's a lot of responsibilities, and you're extremely successful. And curious, like compared to your peers, like what do you think you have done right? Just because, not everybody can achieve this level of success. And who is like on your personal board of advisors when it comes to building up a career?
Great question. I think I've been just fortunate to learn and to grow along the way. And as I've advanced in my career, I've had to learn and develop different skills, at every stage. You mentioned, personal board of advisors. They have been so critical to me throughout my growth. And any big decisions I take, I usually take the time to reach out to my personal advisors to really help me think through it, before I make a big career decision or whatnot. And so, that includes kind of three groups of people. One is like prior leaders, leaders who I respect, who I trust, and who have an interest in my ongoing development. One of which is Mike White, who is the CEO for DIRECTV, and Mike Benson, who was the CIO. So when I was in the technology organization, Mike Benson was my boss, and they've been tremendous sounding boards for me throughout my career process. I've also worked very, very closely with two advisors on the consulting side that I have used to help me transform and advance organizations. And I stay in touch with them, and they bring a different type of expertise, because when I take a new role, as an example, my current role is on the B2B side, they can help me quickly come up to speed on what's going on in the industry, what are the trends, what are competitors potentially doing. And so I have some advisors who I have worked with and who I've counted on from a consulting perspective. And then I have a personal coach who has helped me and who just helps me develop skills as I advance in my career.
I think like the prayer boss, that like everybody has a prayer boss. Curious, like around the personal coach and the two consultants, were they the same people throughout your career, or were they like different? And I guess like what characteristics do you look for in those people? Like, aka, how do you find them, and then how do you identify they could be a good coach for you?
I was fortunate enough to work with these two individuals, and we just enjoyed working with each other and driving impact together. And so throughout my career, when I take a new role on, and if we need some external expertise or support, these are folks who I bring in, and they know me, they know my operating style, and there's a level of trust there. And so I've been lucky enough that it is the same individuals. And it hasn't been my full career, but I would say the last 15 or so years of my career, I've had a chance to work with them. And so I talk to them usually several times a year, and they've played an instrumental role in my growth.
Yeah, that's awesome. Do you look for people with like a different skill set than you, or do you look for people who are like familiar with like exactly how you operate?
Yeah, I look for people, one who I respect and who I trust, because it's really important. You want somebody who's not going to tell you what you want to hear. You want somebody who's going to, tell you what you need to hear. So that to me is really important. And I just find that, I naturally gravitate to people who generally have a lot more diversity of experience than I do. If you find somebody who has the same type of background or experience as you do, then you're not going to get the value, I think, of what an advisor can do, which is to provide you a perspective that might be different than your own, and help you see things through maybe a different lens. And so, they all have very, very different backgrounds than I do, but that's what makes it so effective.
Yeah, that's so cool that you can find someone who, both aware of how you function as well as like can contribute like a separate set of skill sets or views. Speaking of having these like mentors, what is one skill that you're constantly trying to get better at? It could be like sales skill, or it could be like technical skill, like coding or like financial analyzing. Like what would be like something that you're constantly trying to improve?
Yeah, I would say at this stage in my career, right, it's not like
Mhm.
coding or a very specific skill
Yeah.
set, but it's really two things. One is
Mhm.
culture. How
Mhm.
do I build the right culture in my organizations?
Mhm.
I want a culture that is engaged, where
Mhm.
people feel like, their work and contribution matters,
Mhm.
and want a culture that is customer focused,
Mhm.
and is market focused, not internally focused. And so at the end of the day, we're here to deliver the absolute best experience we can
Mhm.
for our customers and make them successful. And you want the broader organization to show up with that mindset. And so I spend a lot of my time on how do I build the right culture in my
Mhm.
leadership team, in my organization. And I'm constantly trying to get better at that craft. The second area where I'm continuously trying to grow is technology. Like technology has
Mhm.
changed, so quickly. And right now, in my current role, the cloud is having a tremendous impact on businesses, and how businesses use technology to completely drive a new level of experiences. As well as AI is playing a pretty
Mhm.
foundational role, as well as connectivity, networks, both fiber and 5G. And so
Mhm.
I try to stay close to understanding what's happening in technology,
Mhm.
because it's that technology that can help us better serve our customers, and in turn, better make them successful with their own customers. And so those are the two areas where I spend my time.
Yeah, for sure. What is like a typical day for you as the chief product and platform officer at AT&T?
Yeah, it's funny. There is no typical day. uh, and what I love about my job, my current job,
Mhm.
is as chief product and platform officer for AT&T Business. We have such a diverse set of customers. So think
Mhm.
about like our customers span virtually every Fortune 1000 company.
Mhm.
We have the federal, state, and local governments,
Mhm.
right, as well as small and medium-sized businesses, and in virtually all industries. And
Mhm.
so, because we serve such a diverse set of customers, they all have very different needs and different challenges. And so,
Mhm.
it makes my job fun and interesting, because I'm not in a routine job where, I'm
Mhm.
looking at the same thing. I'm in a very diverse area. And I try to spend my time and balance it between my team. And
Mhm.
as I said, developing the culture, developing our products and services to make sure
Mhm.
we have a roadmap that's going to be compelling
Mhm.
and effective. Two, with customers, actually
Mhm.
meeting and speaking with customers and understanding what their challenges are, so that we can fully help them and support them. And then the
Mhm.
third group of stakeholders is really our partners. And so when we're helping our customers, very seldomly is it just AT&T solving their problem. Usually we're
Mhm.
working side by side with other organizations to
Mhm.
solve the problem. And so these are the three group of stakeholders that I typically spend my time with. And I'd say it's, maybe I spend 40 or 50% of my time with my team, and the other 50% between customers and partners.
Yeah, for sure. So you mentioned one of your like major amount of your career was spending with DirecTV. So when I think about the business, I feel like essentially you have to create a product and that you have to like distribute it and basically sell it to many users, right? So I feel like the entire organization is towards business development or sales. Like in terms of AT&T, the general organization, I know that you are running product and platform. I guess like what is the organization dominating towards? Because I live in Silicon Valley. A lot of the tech company are saying like product centric. When you think about LinkedIn, it's like product-centric company. For Google, it's like engineering dominant, and for like different company have like a different leadership style or like have a focus. I'm curious, what do you think AT&T was focused on? I guess like what is like core competency of the company?
The way my organization is structured really makes it a fun job. I've got kind of responsibilities for three things, right? One is developing our products and services. So what is the roadmap? How do we bring new products to market? How do we enhance existing products and make them more effective for customers? And then I've got responsibilities for the P&L itself. And so because you have profit loss responsibilities, you're very much in a market facing role. So we work very closely with our sales organizations around how well are we penetrating these products and services within our customer base? Are we effectively distributing them? How can we expand our distribution? What do we do ourselves versus through partners? And then the other side of the P&L is the expense side. And are we efficient from an expense perspective, or are there opportunities from a cost perspective or from a service perspective to be more effective and more efficient? And then the third aspect, the platform aspect of my role, think of that as the enablers. These are the systems, as you said, that are used by the broader organization to distribute and to provide customer care for these products and services. And so, our team is really accountable for all aspects of that life cycle. And that's what makes the job, the product job, really fun.
Yeah, for sure. So it sounds like a lot of it is finance driven. So I guess like the core focus was like the product and services, and then the other two parts are like really related to like the financials. So when you first joined AT&T from DIRECTV, what was like the first day like for you? Like, how do you recognize like what would be your core task, and how do you kind of like adjust yourself from startup / unicorn / acquired top one, like Fortune 100 company, to this even larger organization?
It's you have to relearn, I would say, the process. I spent a lot more time observing and learning the culture of AT&T, right? What's important and what are the kind of the core values of the culture? How are decisions made? Who are the decision makers? What's the process to get to decisions? And at DIRECTV, I'd been there for so long that I had established a network and a reputation for myself. And so it was very easy to get things done. I knew who to call, and they would take my call, and there was a level of trust. AT&T is a much larger organization. It's a much more geographically distributed organization. So DIRECTV was headquartered out of El Segundo, which is a suburb of Los Angeles. And we really had two locations, one in, outside of Denver and one in Los Angeles. And so you could see everybody face to face and have lots of face to face meetings. The AT&T organization is much, much more distributed. And so you may never or very seldomly, be in the same room with somebody. In fact, most people you're working with are joining via virtual setting. And so it was a chance to relearn the culture, to reestablish my own personal brand within a new company, and to rebuild that trust and those relationships that I had a chance to do at DIRECTV. But because you're doing it, a second time around, you're able to do it much more quicker, right? But that becomes really, really important. Each organization, right, has a different DNA to it. And I think as you enter and you become a part of that organization, the most successful people I find are ones that can adapt and can observe and then build enough credibility to ultimately influence the new organization.
What are some actions you took to build the trust to adapt into the organization, besides like spending like time to observe people and just learn in general?
Yeah, I would say I was very fortunate because I had a chance to work on the merger integration team. So before the acquisition took place, there was almost a 1-year process where the government's reviewing the transaction, where you can work to try to do planning. And so as a part of that process, there were probably a dozen or so AT&T leaders that I had a chance to work with. And because we worked together for that year, I think they got to know me, and I got to know them, and we established a level of trust. And so by the time the deal closed, compared to most leaders at DIRECTV, I was fortunate in having worked through that merger integration process, that I had those relationships to start. And so that served me really, really well. And you talked earlier about board of advisors. I had a couple of mini advisors amongst that AT&T leadership team that, hey, if I thought something may or may not work, I could easily pick up the phone and ask them what they thought. But I would, I'd make it a point to invest in those relationships, to help them where I could, because I knew the DIRECTV part of the business so well. And once in a while have lunch with them, but they were instrumental to my, being successfully integrated into the AT&T culture.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned a great thing about culture. I think there's a lot of different business culture between different countries, and also between different companies. What are some actions to quickly build up these relationships? As you mentioned, you already have many advisors throughout this process. I feel like that shows a lot of social skill. What are some ways that people that are early on in their career can learn this type of soft skills?
Yeah, it's a great point. I'm a firm believer, your hard skills are going to kind of get you started in your career. But it is the people skills that are going to determine how far you advance in your career, because ultimately there's only so much you can do yourself. And if you can work effectively in teams, and if you can effectively get the best out of each and every person in your organization, you're going to be so much more successful. And so what are some of the things to your question that you can do to facilitate that? One, I would say, take a genuine interest in people. So, relationships are two-way streets. If I go into a relationship and I go into it with, how can they help me? I'm not going to be successful. It's good to understand, who are the people you want to establish a relationship, be deliberate about that. And then understand, what are their challenges? How can you be of help to them? And never, it takes a long time to build trust, but it takes a second to destroy trust. And so never do anything, never do anything is going to violate the trust. Otherwise you'll lose, you'll lose that relationship you worked so hard to build. And so I think it's really about helping the other person be successful. And that genuinely creates an interest from them in helping you be successful. And you sort of have that mutual success, but it takes time, right? It takes time and investment to nurture those relationships. And it doesn't happen overnight. It takes a little bit of time.
Yeah, for sure. So when you started your career, your first job after consulting was you went to work for Tata Sky. Curious, what were some skills that you've learned around that period, or maybe even before?
Yeah, so I went to Tata Sky. That's it was one of India's first pay TV businesses. And I had gone there because when I was at DIRECTV, I had built up a lot of experience in pay TV. And because this was a brand new industry in India, they needed somebody who is very familiar with, with that industry. And so I got a chance to go be part of the launch team, and went into the country when there was only a few dozen of us that were kind of getting that business off the ground. And by the time I left, there were over 10,000 people working for the company, and the service was launched. Wow. And it was probably one of the most fun things that I've done in my career, because number one, you're building something from the ground up, right? Now, when I go back in the country and you see Tata Sky commercials, and you see billboards everywhere, and you see people turn on their TV and they're using the service, you can think back and say, hey, I was a part of creating that, which is incredibly fulfilling. Two, I would encourage anybody, if they get a chance, to take these expat assignments. because when you do business in another country, you want to talk about it. There are different cultures, there are different practices in the way business is done. And you're working with, in this case, I was working with a global team. I mean, we had people that have come from the UK, Scotland, Australia, Hong Kong, lots of different parts of the world that were sent into the country to help get this business started. And so that was a lot of fun. But building something like that from the ground up and doing it in another country it was a great way to develop skills. And lastly, for me, it was the first time in my career that I was a part of the CEO's executive committee. And so for me, I had a chance to be a part of the CEO's table to understand like how he is making decisions and to work amongst his executive team. And that was immensely helpful to me as well. So when I came back to DIRECTV and then ultimately reported to Mike White, leading customer experience, I had already been part of reporting to a CEO and had been part of an executive committee. And so that experience was helpful, formative for me in a lot of different ways.
Yeah, for sure. Like, how did you guys even launch a company and then like grow it into 10K people within like a year or so? How did that happen? Like, what were some steps that you take to like, I guess, like understand the culture and I guess like build up a team that fast?
Yeah, it was incredible. I mean, so one, Tata Sky is a joint venture between Tata, which is a big conglomerate in India. It's like, one of India's largest organizations, and Sky, which is Rupert Murdoch's enterprise. Obviously they own a lot of assets across the world. So the great thing was we had a lot of resources that we could draw from. But that launch period was amazing because in the 12 months, I was responsible for the information technology function. We did all of the contracts for the applications that were going to be used for the business, whether it's sales and distribute, customer support, billing, finance, HR, all of the self-care online applications that were used. We did the contracts. We hired a pretty large consulting team from TCS that helped us with the implementation. But during that same period, the satellites were launched. The broadcast center, which is how you take all of this content, you bring it into one place and then you beam it up to the satellite so that the satellite can distribute it to all the households that have the dish. That broadcast center was built. And so it was, we were operating 3 shifts and working 7 days a week for a little over a year to get all of that stuff in place. And it was probably the fastest paced thing that I've been a part of in my career. And we were hiring over 1,000 people a month. So just the recruiting process to get that off the ground, because you have to hire, in all the different functions like marketing and sales and customer service and, the people who do the field services, like the installation and support. And so all of that was going on. It was incredibly fast paced.
For your own team, so since you were like in charge of the like information technology services, how did you build up your team at that point? And assuming that was like pretty early on in your career.
Yeah, I was probably mid-stage of my career, but we were very fortunate because this being a Tata company, TCS is one of the largest IT consulting companies in the world, and so the way we got it off the ground is we initially brought on a relatively large consulting team to help us with the implementation. And that helped me get all of the work that needed to get done started. And in the meantime, I started recruiting and hiring my leadership team, the people who were responsible for the application development and support, the architecture, the operations, business analysis, business planning, portfolio management. I hired those leaders. And the good thing was India has one of the largest telecommunications markets because so many people live in the country that I was able to identify a lot of people who have this business to consumer subscription model skill set in the telecom sector. And once I hired those leaders, then I relied on them to start hiring their leaders, and we effectively were able to start scaling the organization. But it took probably over 2 years before we got the full employee team built. And until we did that, we relied on our consulting relationship with TCS to ensure that we can move the ball forward.
Yeah, that's so interesting. So I was originally from China and then I came to the US. My first job was to help a Chinese like real estate acquisition company to set up their office in the US. So it's like similar, but I was not running like a 10,000 people team or something. So I definitely agree with you that like, having the expat experience definitely like kind of like shape you into how you adapt into an organization or how you quickly get yourself familiar with the culture around you. That's definitely like a really cool things to have. And I'm curious, so you spent one of your major part of your career in DIRECTV, and you started your job as like the VP of IT, and you ended your job as VP of customer experience before you guys acquired by AT&T. What is the transition there? So like you started in IT, you were running customer experience. How did that like shift happen? And then like what kind of skills did you have to acquire to get to where you were?
Yeah, it was actually a really fun transition. That that change really was a junction point in my career, because after I led customer experience, every role that I've had has been leading part of the business, so it was a junction point. It is a very different role, and when you're in an IT organization, what you're trying to do is to support your business partners with effective technology to help make them do their jobs more efficiently and more effectively. When I was responsible for customer experience, it was my job to set the strategy, right? Along with that team's, to set the scorecard, and then to enlist the right resources to bring that to life. And so I enjoyed it. It was my first taste of doing that. I loved it because you had a chance to go really deep and understand how customers think about you, what they like about your service, what they don't. In that type of role, you work across every part of the company, whether it's pricing or marketing and setting expectations at the point of sale, or an ad, to service delivery, to the product itself. But you had to create these feedback loops to ensure that you understood how customers reacted to and how they felt about the experiences that we were delivering, and then to go back upstream and influence those. And so it was a lot of fun, and I enjoyed that. I enjoyed that transition, and I loved that job. Really taught me how important customer focus is, and I've tried to carry that forward in every job I've had since.
Yeah, for sure. So in terms of like setting up a good customer experience, like what are some benchmarks that you use to evaluate if your work is successful?
Yeah, we used 3 types of KPIs. One was operational KPIs. So as an example, how many times did people have to call us? Did they have to disruption in their service? Did they have to take time off of work because we had to send an installer or a service technician to fix something? So there's a lot of operational measures that can tell you how well things are going or not. Then we used CX measures. So we used Net Promoter Score, and that's a measure of, really, it's more a function of how are customers feeling about your service. Are they willing to recommend it to others or not? And so that gives you another perspective. And then the third measure, which we think is really important, is churn. And that's just how loyal are your customers. Ultimately, the customers, if they're not happy, have the choice to go to your competitor. And, and our goal was to bring churn down. And so, during that time, I led customer experience. We went from third to first in the industry on NPS. We became the industry leader. And we also had the lowest churn in the pay TV industry in the United States, which meant our customers stayed longer with our service than any of our competitors. And that was, it was very gratifying to see those types of results. And the other thing we also measured, which I think was really important, is we measured, do our employees believe we are customer focused? And when we started that initiative, I remember less than 30% of our employees felt we were customer focused. And, a couple of years into that CX effort, we had well over, I think, 85% of the entire employee base felt that we were a customer-focused company. And so, if your employees don't believe it's happening, then your customers aren't going to feel it. But it's this combination of operational measures as well as CX measures that can tell you how you're doing on CX.
I'm curious, like when you're managing a large team, when you're like setting up customer service and gathering these feedback, that takes time to implement some sort of strategy, right? So when you are at a place, like what were like the first thing you do to study like how they're performing now? Is that just from like the P&L, or like what are some factors that you took into consideration to examine if your business is doing well? And then I guess like at what point do you decided to I'm going to implement my strategy to this organization to test it out?
I've had a chance to take on different jobs in different industries. There's three steps that I use that help me get started when I'm tackling something new. The first one is discovery, but I meet with a lot of people. I meet with our employees. I meet with our customers. I meet with other people in the industry ecosystem. And I understand their perspective on how things are going. And then I also, as you said, I look at a lot of data on how is the business performing. What are as an example, are we the top relative to our competitors in customer experience metrics? How are we doing from a market share perspective? Are we gaining share? Are we stable? Or are we losing share? But you can generally, by looking at that type of data, as well as talking to a lot of people, you can get a pretty good sense of current state. And my second kind of step is really figuring out, okay, what are the priorities and what is the scorecard that I want to really focus the organization around? And I found that, when you try to do too much, you can't really succeed. You can't change everything all at once. So that process is really important because it's about figuring out what are the fewest things that I measure that can drive the biggest impact to the business and to customers. And so typically, I don't want a scorecard that has 50 measures on it. I'm looking for what are the 5 or so things that we really will want to really get behind. And if we do, then we're going to see big differences in our outcomes as a business and our outcomes with customers. And then the third step of that is actually executing that strategy. And that again requires, you need to get all of your employees on board. Like they have to be behind that agenda. They have to understand why, those are the things that are important. So you have to spend time giving them the context. And then you have to change your operating rhythm so that you're inspecting, are you making progress against those? And if you're not making the progress that you want to, what adjustments do you make, to your plan? And so I typically, those are the 3 steps, whether, it's my most recent role or any of my previous roles that have served me well.
So basically you're saying there's like around 3 steps. One is like you talk to everybody, you understand like things from different people's perspective, and then you like creating an agenda with like 5 key things that you're going to be focusing on. And then in the end, you figure out like how are we going to execute on this plan and what are some challenges, and then you adjust along the way, basically.
Yep, you got it.
That's awesome. And when it comes to like making a 1 year plan, I assume you have to look at like what you want to achieve by the end of the year, right? Like, because we're about to getting into 2022, which is crazy. So how would you set up your personal goal or like yearly goal for your business? Is that going to be like measured by looking at like what competitor does, or like how do you do the mapping, and then how do you come up with a number? For example, if you're hitting like a sales goal or whatever, should that be like 25% higher than the previous year? Like how do you kind of come up with these numbers?
I would say two things. One, you don't change your strategy every year, right? Calendar year. So the things that we're focused on are typically multi-year engagements. But as you said, what you try to do is to say, okay, if something's a very important measure for us or area of focus for us, then how much progress do we expect to make, in this year? And you use analytics to help you set stretch goals, but still achievable, right? Because you want to push the organization, to do the very best that they can, without actually, over committing. And typically, these scorecards, as you said, they include several different measures. One is how successful are we with our customers and that experience. It typically includes market performance. So, and sometimes, product categories are growing very rapidly. And so you'll have a very, very aggressive growth expectation. Some markets are mature, and therefore, you might have a more stable, and there are some products that are in decline, right? That people are transitioning. And in those cases, you might have measures that are measuring how good are we at transitioning old technology to the new one, because that becomes a point in time where they may make a decision to stay with you or go to a competitor, as well as you have financial P&L objectives that you're responsible for. So it's a combination of those things that we usually set, and we set the goals and then they cascade into the organization.
So a lot of our listeners are like startup founders or like working at a company that's like leading their own team, and curious, like when it comes to goal setting, should you prioritize on like the monetization goals, or should you prioritize on growth? Because AT&T is such a big business. Curious, for example, let's use like my business as an example. Let's say we have advertisers for the core show, but to expand the business, you have to think about, do you create different lines for the business, for example, newsletter or like YouTube channel or TikTok, or should you stick with like what you're good at, or should you like expand into, let's say, crypto or like anything that's like gonna be really capturing like public attention? When you're making these decisions, like what are some factors that you will be looking at in terms of growing this?
Yeah, you bet. I mean, I think you want to look at a couple of things. One, each organization has something that they bring to the table. When you're looking at growth opportunities in the market, you're looking at, hey, is this a good market to be in? Sometimes you can go into a market that, because it's so fragmented, even if you're successful, you're not going to have, a lot of opportunity for returns. And so, is it a good market? And then two, can we be successful in that market? Like, do the skill sets that our company has, both the intellectual property, the human assets, and the skill sets that we have, can they be successful in that market, or can they be adapted to be successful? And usually, if those two things look pretty good, then that may be something that you want to lean into. If one of those two things does not look good, then I would say it's a red flag. I mean, you can pursue it, but your chances of success may not be, all that great.
For sure. Is a fragmented market good or bad?
I would say generally fragmented markets are not good, in the sense that, a lot of businesses scale matters. When you get to effective scale, is when you can start to become more efficient as a business in everything you do, whether that's advertising, whether that's distribution, whether that's customer support. But if you have thousands and thousands of small companies that are, competing in a specific market, and you're just one of those thousands of companies, then you're not going to be able to, get very big because it's a fragmented market. And B, financially, it's going to be difficult because you don't have the scale. And so your investments will probably not be very efficient. And so you want a healthy market to go into. It's your ability to execute right in the market. And if you have a product or a service that is truly solving, a customer need, and you can do that better, than others, because of your IP, or because of your human capital, or because of the other businesses that you're in, then you can reach the scale required to be successful, right? And so, AT&T has a scaled telecommunications business. And so we have wireless networks that are deployed across the country. We have fixed fiber networks, and then we have services that sit on top of those networks. And so we generally know, hey, here's an area where we can bring a lot of value to a customer, or here's a completely unrelated area where, it could be us, or it could be one of, several different people who can pursue that. And so you try to make that evaluation, and be disciplined.
So when it comes to your personal development, like, what do you think is your unfair advantage?
What has been successful for me is, number one, I'm somebody who's adaptable, right? I've been able to be successful in consulting. I've been able to be successful in mid-sized organizations and large companies, and even be successful in launching a business out of the country. And so being adaptable is really important, because that means, the world is changing fast. Technology is changing fast. And so you have to be able to adapt, and otherwise you become irrelevant. And then the ability to, come to an organization and bring the experience on being customer focused, being able to run a scaled business, and to be able to have a track record of growing businesses and motivating teams, are all ingredients that I think are very transferable in different industries and different jobs. And so what I just love about this point in my career is just I've had a chance to be a part of so many amazing things, but also I feel like everything that I've done is build tools that are in my toolkit that can make me even more effective at the next job. And so, that's how you kind of personally grow. And it's been fun.
So talking about, like, after you joined AT&T, you started as a SVP of product management. Then you were the EVP and GM of broadband and video. And then now you're the chief product and platform officer. You grow really fast, right? Like, so how do you set goals for yourself each year, and what kind of skill do you acquire each year to make sure that you're on track to be like better than like who you were like yesterday?
What's worked for me is stay very focused on your current job, and do that job to the best of your ability. And usually if you do that and you show good results and you build a good culture and reputation for yourself, the next job, somebody else's problem, right? To say, hey, maybe we could get even more out of Rashesh in a different role. And so I've never really thought about, gee, I want to get that role next. What do I do now to position myself to, it's really been more a pull-based approach. And, I try to just make sure when I step into a role, that I try to leave that role with the business in a better state than when I inherited it, from a customer outcome perspective, from a financial outcome perspective and from a culture perspective, within the organization. And when you do those things, there's no shortage of challenges. You naturally tend to get more and more responsibilities. And being adaptable, if you're not adaptable, then only way you can grow is to stay in the function that you're in. And you have to just keep, waiting for the next person to leave or to retire to get that next role. But if you're adaptable, you can work in different parts of the business. You can work on different businesses itself. And that opens up the aperture on the number of opportunities you might be a good fit for. And so I would say stay focused on your current job, knock it out of the park there, and make sure you're somebody who's adaptable. And if you do that, good opportunities are going to come.
I feel like this is a theme. So
yeah, well, look, I think being adaptable is you be adaptable by doing different things. As an example, you started your career, as you said, working for a multinational company, and you were trying to help them establish something in the US, right? And now you're also doing, podcasts, and you're launching your own brand, and you're learning how to do something completely different. And it's a different skill set. You need to find people who you can bring onto your show. You need to find advertisers. And so by doing something different, right, you're growing your skill set. And for me, the fact that, I've worked on different things in different geographies, in different industries, has helped me learn how to go into something new, learn it, and to work with a team to try to drive outcomes, in those situations. And so best way to become adaptable is to actually put yourself in different situations over time. And just like anything else, right? The more you work on something, the better you get at it.
for sure. So last real question is, what do you think is the future of the telecom business?
Oh, I think telecommunications has got an incredibly bright future. I mean, just think about the last 20 years, right? The wireless industry with 1G, we started to be able to make calls everywhere. You're too young to probably remember, but before that, you had to have a cord attached, to your phone. With 2G, we started texting. The 3G revolution, you started, being able to browse the internet. With 4G came the modern smartphone era, right? You had all these new business models that got invented because of the smartphone. And now you're talking about 5G plus. And this is going to be about devices and sensors, millions and millions of them being connected to the network and to the cloud. And combined with AI, it's going to transform every aspect of our lives. I mean, in the automotive sector, you're going to see, autonomous vehicles. You're going to see all sorts of entertainment services become available in the car. The car is going to look more like a computer than it does a car. In healthcare, you're going to see remote patient diagnostics, remote patient care. If you walk into a hospital today, you see hundreds and hundreds of these devices that are measuring things, and they're all connected to the network. And that's all going to get, in a world where you can do all of that remotely. It's going to significantly change that experience. In manufacturing, we're going to see advances through robotics and through quality control. In cities, you're going to see the advent of smart cities, and infrastructure become intelligent so that we make better use of our resources. And so it's unbelievable, the types of things that you get to work on when you are in the telecommunications sector. And really, telecom is about bringing the future forward. And so I'm excited to essentially bring, some of these experiences to life as we move forward.
Yeah, for sure. I love the whole picture of like the future. So we're at the 1 minute fire round session, I have like a couple questions for you. So one is, what's your favorite book, or what's your favorite information diet if book is not your thing?
Yeah, I probably read. I use Apple News a lot, and have a whole bunch of subscriptions that I try to stay current on. So I love reading about business and about technology. And then on books, my favorite book, I think, is a biography for FDR. He was just such an incredible leader who led the country during that time of Great Depression, and he put in a lot of investment in infrastructure that has made America competitive country that it is today. And so I just love learning about his story and about how he took over at a time when it seemed so challenging, and it became the time that we put in all the work to make America what it is today. And so I love reading about biographies.
Love that. Who made the biggest impact in your career?
I would say the two Mikes that I mentioned. I advanced a lot and I grew a lot, and they both took the time to mentor me and to kind of take me under their wings. And so, it was wonderful to learn from them.
Who would you invite to your dinner party?
If I could invite anybody, I think it'd be a pretty eclectic table. Elon Musk would be on that list. He is on top of our list for all the guests. So. I bet. Yeah. It's just unbelievable, the types of things that he's working on. I think Satya Nadella would be on that list. I think it's been incredible what he's done at Microsoft since he's taken over that organization. I would probably, bring to that list. If I could go back in time and have FDR, I would love to have FDR at the dinner table. And then, on the entertainment side, I think Tom Brady would be a pretty fun person to have at the table. I think he's defined, a standard for what it means to be a winner and to be able to lead teams the right way. So maybe those would be some of the people that are on my list, and maybe Steve Jobs, if we can go back in time.
Yeah, I love those. So where can we find you outside of work?
Outside of work, I love usually in nature. So I love hiking. I love mountain biking. My wife and I, 5 years ago, we went to the summit of Mount Kilimanjaro in Africa. 3 years ago, we went to Everest Base Camp. And so we just love being in the mountains and in nature.
Awesome. Oh, well, thank you so much for coming on to this show, Rashesh.
Yeah, it was a pleasure. Thanks for having me.